What if everything you've learned about Jesus so far was just the surface of an unfathomable ocean? What if behind the miracles, sweet words, and gestures of compassion, there was a profound ancient knowledge, carefully concealed by veils of time, translation, and power? That's the question no one dares to ask. And perhaps that's why it holds so much power. The mystery lies not only in what has been revealed, but in what has been suppressed. And it is through this crack that today we will begin to cross the first door. There is a colossal hole in the biblical narrative, and it's not figurative. The Gospels acknowledge, but completely ignore 18 years of Jesus' life. From age 12 to 30, nothing is said, no account, no story, no memory, just silence. A deafening silence that echoes in the corridors of history like a planned omission. Why? Where was Jesus during these years? What did he learn? And, most importantly, what was it decided we should not know? This gap arouses the attention not only of theologians, but also of scholars of universal spirituality. There is a hidden line of investigations that points to an initiatory journey, a path that connects the young Jesus to the oldest traditions of the earth, from Egyptian temples to Himalayan monasteries, from Vedic texts to Chaldean mysteries. This hypothesis is not new, but has always been considered heresy. Still, there are clues in forgotten texts, fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and apocryphal records that suggest Jesus walked among masters of ancient wisdom. Within these traditions we find the concept of doors. Not physical doors, but symbolic passages between different states of consciousness and reality. The Egyptians spoke of the 12 doors of the Duat, realms through which the soul passed after death. The Essenes, a group with which Jesus possibly had contact, practiced purification rituals linked to internal and external cycles, vibrational portals. The Hindus described chakras as energy vortices, true thresholds between the visible and invisible world. But why 13? What does this extra door represent? In ancient numerology, 13 was a number of transition, rupture, and rebirth. While 12 symbolized completeness, the 12 apostles, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 signs, 13 was the step beyond, the gateway of transformation, the unknown, the forbidden. Not surprisingly, in many cultures, 13 was associated with bad luck. But what was feared was not evil, but misunderstood power. The 13 represented the freedom of the spirit in the face of structure. Jesus, in challenging the dogmas of his time, may have been this embodied 13. Perhaps that's why his birth, his actions, and even his death are surrounded by numerological symbolism. His birth, according to astrological calculations, would have occurred under rare celestial conjunctions. His miracles, when analyzed in sequence, compose patterns of sacred geometry. His words carry Kabbalistic repetitions, and his final discourse, the Last Supper, had exactly 13 places at the table. Coincidence? Or a code disguised as tradition? Throughout history, this encoded structure has been preserved, but fragmented. The canonical Gospels, compiled with political and theological criteria, left out dozens of texts considered today of invaluable historical and spiritual value. The Gospel of Thomas, for example, does not narrate facts, but brings 114 sayings of Jesus, many of them enigmatic, almost Gnostic. One of them says, "The kingdom is within you and also outside of you. When you know yourselves, then you will be known." Which master says this without knowing the multiplicity of worlds? Here we begin to see an emerging pattern. The figure of Jesus not just as a redeemer, but as an interdimensional guide. A teacher of hidden realities who used the language of symbols, parables, and gestures to teach the crossing between veils. It wasn't about future salvation, but about liberation in the present. A liberation that depended on the recognition of something greater and deeper, the divine nature that dwells within each being. This first door is therefore the threshold between the traditional narrative and the transformative question. The question that was not asked is not, who was Jesus, Zrenia, but rather, what did he know, and why was it hidden from us? It is at this point that we begin to realize that perhaps the greatest revolution of his message was not in what he openly said, but in what he silently knew. And perhaps, just perhaps, this silence was an invitation for each of us to unravel it for ourselves. Upon crossing this first door, we leave behind the passivity of belief and step into the territory of active search. We understand that faith is not just about trusting, but investigating, feeling, crossing internal gateways with courage and a thirst for truth. Perhaps Jesus didn't want followers, but the awakened. And for this reason, his most powerful messages were not in the crowds, but in the moments of quiet, in the deserts of the soul, in the subtleties of his words. This is the invitation that is renewed now at the end of this part. The door is not outside, it is within, and once crossed, nothing remains the same. Reality begins to unfold. The familiar becomes symbolic, the symbolic becomes real, and the real reveals itself to be much more vast than we were taught. By crossing the first door, we stop merely looking at Jesus, and we begin to look as he does. For centuries, the name Jesus has been associated with a limited, domesticated image, almost emptied of its vastness. It was transformed into dogma, a symbol of institutionalized faith and used to control, more than liberate. But in his time, he was not recognized by religious authorities. He was seen as a threat, subversive, a man who spoke to the people using words that transcended logic, as if trying to translate mysteries that don't fit into common language. This second door leads us directly to the heart of this mystery. Who was Jesus truly? Not in historical or theological terms, but vibrational, cosmic, multidimensional. There is a powerful clue in his own statement. Before Abraham was, I am. This phrase, overlooked in many superficial readings, is a code. By saying I am, and not I was, Jesus invokes the sacred name attributed to God in the Hebrew tradition, YHWH, but he does so not as one who quotes, but as one who embodies. This is the first sign that he recognized himself not as a personality, but as a timeless state of consciousness, a point of intersection between worlds, a being who, even within the density of matter, maintained his essence connected to the source. Alternative scholars have argued that Jesus was an initiate in various ancient traditions. They suggest he studied with the Essenes, a mystical group that practiced ritual purification and believed in the coming of a light master. Others point to his travels to India, where he might have learned from Vedic masters about prana, karma, and chakras. There are even theories that he was in Tibet, learning deep meditation from the lamas. And in Egypt, he may have traversed the corridors of the temples of Isis and Thoth, where priests taught the science of the soul. Could it be a coincidence that the initiation rites of these places involved symbolic death, spiritual resurrection, and knowledge of the invisible worlds? These journeys are not just geographical, they are internal, and they are reflected in the Gospels themselves. Their miracles, when read from an initiatory perspective, cease to be mere acts of power and reveal themselves as symbolic demonstrations of mastery over the planes of being. Walking on water represents mastery over emotions. Multiplying the loaves is the mastery of abundance. Healing the blind reveals their ability to reactivate the inner eye. Expelling demons, purification of dense energy fields. Each act was a hidden teaching conveyed not only by what he did, but by the vibration he carried. Jesus seemed to be fully aware that he inhabited more than one reality. In his words, it was common to refer to the kingdom of heaven, but he did not place it in the future, but rather within and among us. The kingdom of heaven is within you. This is an interdimensional statement. It does not speak of a place, but of a frequency, a state of profound alignment where separation ceases. When he said, "My kingdom is not of this world," He was not referring to another planet, but to a level of reality that coexists with this one, and of which few are aware. This perception is confirmed when we look at his encounters with the disciples. Often, he spoke in codes. He used parables, metaphors, silences. Why? Because certain knowledge cannot be transferred through words. They are only accessed when the being opens up internally. Jesus knew this. He didn't want followers. He wanted the awakened. That's why he asked before healing, "Do you believe that I can do this?" The healing was not from him to the other, but from the other through him. He was the channel, the mirror, the reminder. Some apocryphal Gospels, especially the Gnostic ones, delve deeper into this view. The Gospel of Philip asserts that Christ is a frequency, an anointing, and not a surname. It discusses the process of becoming Christ as a state attainable by every human being. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene reveals intimate dialogues between her and Jesus about the soul, the archetypes, and the obstacles between the spirit and the light. These texts were discarded from the official canons, perhaps for a clear reason. They empower the individual. They take away the exclusive power of religious institutions and return it to the inner self of the human being. There are even indications that the word Christ was understood as a specific vibrational band, a heightened state of consciousness that transcends ego, time, and space. Just as Buddha represents the awakened, Christ would represent the anointed with the light of truth. In this sense, Jesus would not be the only one, but the first of many to manifest this frequency in flesh and bone. And his life's mission would not only be to save, but to teach the path of activating this Christ consciousness in everyone. This path is not linear. It requires surrender, openness, and a type of faith that is not about believing in dogmas, but diving into one's own abyss to find the inner light. Jesus constantly spoke about being born again, and this has nothing to do with conversion. It speaks of a rupture in the perception of reality, a new birth of the soul, a conscious access to layers of existence previously hidden by the veils of the conditioned mind. Upon opening this door, we understand that he not only knew about these veils, he constantly went through them. Many accounts of Jesus' appearances after the resurrection indicate that he changed form, appeared and disappeared suddenly, passed through walls. This is consistently described in the Gospels in a discreet but direct way. What we are seeing here is a being in transit between dimensions, a master who had already overcome the barriers of space-time and could move between realities with full awareness. This would only be possible if he knew, and mastered, the veils that separate the worlds. And then arises the question that begins to dissolve the pillars of fear. If Jesus did this, why not us? If he claimed that you will do greater works than these, was he giving us a clue about our true dormant potential? Perhaps the greatest audacity of his message was not to challenge the Roman Empire, but to dare to assert that divinity can fully inhabit the human, that the sacred is not distant, but within reach of an awakened consciousness. We close this second door with a revelation. Jesus was not a miracle worker, he was a teacher of higher realities, someone who deeply knew about the multiple nature of existence, and he left hidden keys in his words, in his silences, in his actions. It is up to each one of us to decide whether we will use these keys to open the next door, and the next will lead us straight to the heart of the temple and to the mystery of the veils it guarded. Imagine standing before the Temple of Solomon, one of the most sacred and mysterious buildings ever erected. It was not just a place of worship, but an architectural representation of the invisible structure of the universe and of human beings. The temple was divided into sections: the courtyard, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. The latter space was separated by a thick veil, which no one could pass through, except for the high priest, and only once a year. But this veil was not just fabric. It symbolized the boundary between the world of men and the divine presence. Access was restricted, and the mystery, absolute. Therefore, When the Gospels narrate that at the moment of Jesus' death, the veil of the temple was torn from top to bottom, this is not just a dramatic event. It is an encoded spiritual statement. It is the collapse of a barrier, the rupture of a separation maintained for centuries. In other words, access to the presence, the source, the divine, was directly restored to humanity. Not by a ritual, not by an intermediary, but by a change in the collective vibration caused by the conscious sacrifice of an awakened being. But there is something even deeper behind this veil. Jewish mystical traditions, especially the Kabbalah, speak of multiple worlds. Asiya, the world of action; Yetzirah, the world of formation; Bariah, the world of creation; and Atziluth, the world of divine emanation. Each of these worlds is separated by veils, vibrational layers that prevent direct vision. They are not physical barriers, but densities of perception, and the temple represented this cosmic map. The innermost veil, therefore, was a symbol of the ultimate boundary between the world and the infinite light. These veils also exist within us. They are layers of the mind, of emotion, of memory, and of conditioning that separate us from pure consciousness. They are the filters through which we see the world, and that prevent us from seeing reality as it is. Jesus, in living and teaching, not only pointed the way beyond these veils, he passed through them daily. His actions, his silences, and his parables were laden with subtle instructions on how to dissolve each one of them. Therefore, the metaphor of the torn veil is also internal. It represents the collapse of the deepest veil, that of the illusion of separation between the human being and the divine. Jesus never said, "Worship me." He said, "Be perfect as your Father is perfect." In other words, he saw us as equals in potential, ready to access the Holy of Holies within, the secret room of the soul, where the living presence resides. This is the point where spirituality and consciousness become inseparable. In hidden records and esoteric traditions, the veil is also present in various cultures. In ancient Egypt, the goddess Isis is often depicted with a veil, the veil of universal wisdom. Only the initiated could see her without the veil. In other words, only those who transcended illusion could understand the true reality. Plato spoke of the cave as a prison of shadows, where humans lived projecting illusions until they turned to the light and then saw the world as it truly is. The analogy of the veil is universal. But who put the veil there? And why? The answer may seem uncomfortable. We did. At some point in the history of consciousness, we chose to forget. We decided to limit the experience to immerse ourselves in the world of form. This was not a mistake. It was a journey. But now we are being called to remember. And Jesus, as an avatar of remembrance, came to show us how to navigate through the veils we built ourselves. The greatest audacity of his presence was to transgress the role of the priest. He touched the unclean, healed on Saturdays, spoke with Samaritans, women, and tax collectors, all considered unworthy according to the religion of the time. In other words, he tore the veil of exclusion, hierarchy, and separation between the sacred and the profane. His own life was a constant violation of the system that kept the veil standing. And this rebellion was, in truth, a call to unity. At the same time, his teaching was deeply internal. When he said, "Enter your room, close the door, and pray in secret," he was not just talking about a physical room. The room is the inner chamber of the soul, the place where there are no spectators, the space where the self meets the eternal. What he proposed was a direct, unmediated, deep spirituality, independent of external structures. This represented a massive threat to any power system, because it placed spiritual power in the hands of each awakened person. That's why so many texts were removed, hidden, deemed heretical, because they contained maps, instructions, and descriptions of crossing the veils. The Book of Enoch, for example, narrates journeys to other dimensions, encounters with beings of light, and visions of the divine throne. Apocryphal texts describe elevated states of consciousness, transfigurations, and mysterious appearances. All this tells us that the traditional narrative is only part of the story. The other part remained between the lines, waiting for more attentive eyes to rediscover it. And at the center of it all is the idea that the veil is a choice. It can be held by fear or torn by courage. It can be reinforced by limiting beliefs or dissolved by conscious faith. Jesus showed us that the crossing is possible, not just after death, but also in life. The experience of divine presence, of connection with the expanded reality, is not a future prize, but a present possibility. All it takes is crossing. All it takes is wanting to see. Thus, we have reached the end of this third door. The veil has not only fallen in the temple, but within us. Each layer of judgment, fear, control, and limitation that dissolves brings us closer to the Holy of Holies within us. There is no more mediation. There is no more hierarchy. There is only being, the now, and the reminder that everything is connected. And it is with this vision that we prepare for the next revelation, the door of silence and the desert, where veils are faced by the absence of everything. Nothing reveals more about the nature of a being than the way they face emptiness. The desert, throughout the spiritual history of mankind, is much more than sand and heat. It is the stage where masks fall, noises cease, and inner voices intensify. Jesus chose the desert not as an escape, but as an initiation, 40 days and 40 nights, a number laden with symbolism. It represents transformation, a complete cycle, a crossing. The question is, what did he see in the silence? And what did he find among the veils of solitude? The absence of detailed records from those days is, in itself, revealing. The desert is the place of the unspoken, of the unnameable. In it, there is no audience, only presence. It's where the ego screams and the spirit whispers. There, Jesus faced what tradition calls temptations, but we can understand as internal archetypes, condensed thought forms that challenge awakened consciousness. The tempter offers power, recognition, security, the three traps of the soul. Jesus' refusal was not merely ethical, it was vibrational. He did not align with these frequencies, and by doing so, he passed through another veil. Silence in the desert is not the absence of sound, it is absolute presence. It is there that the Logos, the divine word, manifests not in words, but in pure vibration. The same Logos that, according to John, was with God and was God. In the desert, without distractions, Jesus tuned into this primordial field. Prayer becomes breath, the outcry becomes listening, and gradually, the conditioned mind gives way to expanded consciousness. In this space, the veil of illusion naturally dissolves. The desert therefore symbolizes an internal process that we are all invited to experience. The external void mirrors the emptying of the ego. Physical fasting represents the fasting from stimuli, from repetitive thoughts, from ready-made responses. Each day there is like a tear in the fabric of the ordinary world. It's as if time dilutes and the soul can finally perceive what has always been there, but was covered by the density of routine. Not surprisingly, it is in the desert that the prophets listen, that the masters see, that the portals open. Many spiritual masters from different cultures have undergone this rite. Buddha faced Mara under the tree. Moses climbed the mountain and fasted. Zarathustra withdrew for years. The desert appears in different forms: mountains, caves, forests, seclusion. But the principle is the same: the confrontation with the invisible that inhabits the visible. Jesus, in doing this, was not only strengthening his spirit, but realigning his vibration with the higher realms. And there is something subtle but essential in this process: the non-word. Jesus' silence is not empty, but full. It carries more wisdom than entire treatises. Silence is one of the most advanced languages of awakened consciousness. It doesn't need to explain, convince, defend. It reveals. And that's why many of his most powerful teachings came after periods of retreat. The desert was the download. Public life, the upload. Silence was not absence. It was preparation for the creative word. The tempter, in the desert narrative, is not an external figure. It is the reflection of one's own untransmuted desires and fears. The three temptations represent the three main veils: that of the body, material satisfaction; that of the mind, vanity and control; and that of the spirit, the illusion of separation from God. In refusing each one of them, Jesus was not only resisting evil, he was elevating his frequency beyond the realm of these energies. It was as if he was saying, "I am one with the source, and no illusion can convince me otherwise." This vibrational clarity would accompany him for the rest of his life. After the desert, Jesus emerges with an inner authority that no religious school could teach. He speaks as one who has power, not because he learned, but because he remembered. The desert was his school without walls, his temple without altars, his journey through the abyss towards the full remembrance of who he was and always has been. This practice of emptying, gathering, and deep listening is one of the most powerful tools for crossing veils. There is no way to access other realities while carrying the burdens of ego, fear, haste. Silence is a key, and few have the courage to use it, because it demands surrender. It demands detachment from the constructed identity. It demands trust in the invisible. But Jesus showed us that this path is not only possible, it is essential. In the deserts of life, we are invited to stop, to listen, to silence the noise of the external world in order to access the subtle melody of the internal world. The desert could be a loss, an illness, a crisis. But it can also be a conscious choice, a sacred pause, a fast of the soul. And when we embrace it, we discover that there is something there waiting for us. Our original voice, our true vision, our unnamed power. Upon closing this fourth door, we realize that silence is not absence, it is fullness. The desert is not punishment, it is revelation. And the real temptation is not to fall, but to forget who we are. Jesus traversed this journey as a mirror to ours, and he showed us that on the other side of silence, there is a portal, a veil that is torn not with words, but with presence. And it is with this presence that we now advance towards the next stage, the science of light and the eyes that see beyond the veil. You are the light of the world. With this simple statement, Jesus revealed one of the most powerful spiritual codes in history. He didn't say you have light or you carry light. He said that we are light. This is not just a poetic expression or a pious analogy. It is a scientific and spiritual truth that spans millennia of ancestral wisdom. Light, in occult teachings and in modern advances in physics, is not just what illuminates, it's what constructs reality. And Jesus seemed to know this on a level far beyond his time. Light is, in its essence, frequency. All matter, all form, all beings, including you, vibrate at a certain light frequency. The ancient masters knew that raising the vibration literally meant transmuting matter into expanded consciousness. Jesus performed healings, not with medicines, but with words charged with frequency. Rise and walk. Your faith has healed you. These seemingly simple phrases carried a vibrational coherence field capable of reorganizing the energy structure of the person's body. This science is not unknown. In the Gnostic Gospels, such as that of Thomas, Jesus says, "If your eyes are pure, your whole body will be filled with light." Here he directly connects spiritual vision with cellular enlightenment. The body of light is a reality taught by various esoteric traditions. It is the subtle field that connects us to the higher planes. The pineal gland, called the all-seeing eye by various cultures, is the epicenter of this activation. Interestingly, it symbolically appears in the center of the Egyptian cross, in the Eye of Horus. and even in the symbol of the Vatican. The transfiguration of Jesus on Mount Tabor is another emblematic moment. The Gospels report that his face shone like the sun and his garments became radiant. This is not a metaphor. It's a description of a visible vibrational elevation, a state of full coherence with the frequency of divine light. Moses and Elijah appear at this moment, two other masters connected to the light. This suggests that this meeting did not occur in a common place, but in an interdimensional zone where veils were temporarily lifted. In the field of quantum physics, it is already known that light and matter are interconnected by subtle energy principles. The phenomenon of cellular bioluminescence, the emission of photons by DNA, and the electromagnetic fields surrounding our body are modern testimonies of what Jesus demonstrated through touch, word, and gaze. He not only saw beyond the physical, he vibrated beyond the physical. The healing of the man born blind, as narrated in John, is particularly symbolic. Jesus spits on the ground, makes mud, and anoints the man's eyes. Why mud? Why the direct touch to the eyes? This refers to the genesis of humanity, mud as the raw material. By touching the eyes, he not only heals, he recreates vision, both literally and symbolically. The man is born again. He not only sees the physical world, but when touched by a field of light, he accesses a new vibrational reality. The use of light also manifests in the way Jesus taught. His parables, seemingly simple, are fractal structures of wisdom. Light carries information, and each of his stories carries multiple layers of meaning, like prisms refracting a single beam into multiple colors. Spiritual truth is not conveyed linearly, but in spirals of consciousness, like the very structure of DNA. And when we talk about eyes that see, we are discussing spiritual vision. In various healings, Jesus asks, "Do you believe?" Not because he needed the person's approval, but because faith activates the perception of the invisible. Those who believe see, and those who see manifest. Light, in this sense, is not a phenomenon that comes from outside, but a frequency that is activated from within. That's why he would say, "If your eyes are good," as if the ability to see the divine was proportional to the purity of the inner gaze. Apocryphal accounts and esoteric traditions suggest that Jesus taught specific techniques of breathing, visualization, and contemplation. These practices, similar to those of Eastern masters, aim to awaken the body of light, known in Egypt as Sahu, in India as Sarira, and in mystical Christianity as glorious body. Modern science is beginning to grasp this through studies on the heart's electromagnetic field, human biofield, and expansion of consciousness in altered states. And here emerges one of the deepest keys to this door: light is transmissible. When Jesus said, "Go and make disciples," he was not talking about preaching doctrines, but about radiating frequencies. He transferred light codes through coexistence, presence, touch. It was like a torch igniting other torches. That's why the disciples, after the resurrection, performed similar feats: healings, visions, levitations. It was not a miracle, it was resonance. On a personal level, this door invites us to awaken our own eyes, not the physical ones, but the internal ones. The third eye, the heart, the intuition. Light is not just what we see, it's what we are when we see with truth. Jesus did not come to show us something external. He came to reveal our own inner light, a light that does not go out, but that has been veiled by layers of fear, doubt, and forgetfulness. Upon closing this fifth door, we understand that the path of light is not about dogma, but about vibration. It's not about salvation, but about remembering who we are. The real vision is not in the eyes, it's in the frequency with which we vibrate. And when this light is activated, the veils dissolve. The world changes, healing comes, and the invisible becomes visible. And so, illuminated by this understanding, we move towards the next key: the body, the bread, and the coded language that Jesus used to transmute realities. At the heart of the Christian tradition, there is a revered moment, reproduced, but rarely understood in its vibrational depth: the Last Supper. For many, it is a symbolic act of farewell. For others, a sacramental institution. But for the awakened eyes, it is a multidimensional ritual. Every gesture, every word, every element on the table is imbued with coded meanings that transcend time and space. Jesus was not just breaking bread, he was opening portals. When he said, "This is my body, this is my blood," he was not only referring to the future sacrifice, he was talking about the transmutation of matter into light, about the process by which the physical body becomes a vehicle of the divine. By sharing the bread and wine, Jesus anchored in the disciples a frequency, an energy code that contained the essence of the Christ presence. It was as if each particle of that bread carried a field of light that, when absorbed, altered the energetic structure of the recipient. This connects to ancient traditions that viewed food not only as physical nutrition, but as conductors of spiritual frequency. In Egypt, the consecrated bread was part of initiation rituals. In India, the prasad, blessed food, carries the energy of the master. Among the Essenes, food was prepared with specific chants, conscious breathing, and pure intention, as it was believed that the food's vibration directly affected the spiritual clarity of the initiate. Jesus, by raising the bread, was activating an age-old frequency. But there's something even deeper in this gesture: the body. Jesus wasn't advocating for the idolization of his body. He was recognizing the body as an instrument of transcendence. He referred to himself as a temple, and when he asserted that whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood will have eternal life, he wasn't encouraging spiritual cannibalism, but revealing an alchemical mystery. Eating and drinking his essence was to integrate the Christ-like vibrational pattern, allowing that field to operate within each one. For this reason, the feast was held with the 12, plus him. 13. Again, the number of transmutation, the archetype of breaking with the old cycle. Judas, the traitor, may have been the initiator of the alchemy of pain, which triggers the process of crucifixion, which in turn triggers the resurrection. Nothing there is by chance. 13 sitting at the table form a closed frequency circle, a portal. The feast was not a dinner, it was a ritual of spiritual DNA activation. The language used there is also noteworthy. Jesus thanks, breaks, shares, gives. Each verb is a dynamic action. Gratitude opens the field. Breaking creates vibrational multiplication. Sharing creates a network. Giving seals the frequency. It's as if each verb had the function of preparing the disciples' bodies and consciousness to receive a transmission beyond words. They were not just receiving bread, they were being imprinted with the vibration of Christ. There is also the language of the body. The gestures of Jesus, such as lifting his eyes to the heavens, laying his hands, touching with compassion, were not random. They were codified gestures, ancestral practices of manipulating the subtle field. The laying on of hands is a millennial technique, present in shamanic, Taoist, African, and Jewish cultures. The hand transmits energy. When he touched the eyes, ears, or hearts, he was literally reprogramming the vibrational patterns of these people. In the ancient world, long before the advent of modern psychology, the masters knew that the body stores memories, traumas, lights, and shadows. Therefore, body language was a form of healing. Jesus' body, as the incarnate vehicle of the Christ vibration, was a living antenna, radiating fields of coherence. Being near him was like being under an invisible sun. The dark layers of the being began to dissolve just by his presence. The Eucharist, as it was later named, lost much of its original understanding. It was ritualized, dogmatized, and in many cases, emptied of its vibrant living charge. But in its origin, it was a practice of deep activation. The bread was a symbol of the transfigured matter, the wine of blood as a river of life, the body of the temple, the gesture of transmission, the table of the magical circle where the worlds intersect. It was the supper of the worlds, the banquet of the plains. Another important detail, Jesus washed the disciples' feet before supper. A gesture of humility, yes, but also of energetic unblocking. The feet contain reflex points of all the organs and channels of the body. Washing them is preparing the being to receive light. It's cleaning portals. It's opening paths. It was as if he was saying, now that your paths have been purified, you can enter the innermost holy of holies. Each gesture was a code. And at the center of it all, there was silence. The absence of explanation. Jesus didn't explain anything. He just acted. The gesture spoke, the vibration taught. This shows that Christ's language was not logical, it was frequency. A language that can only be understood by an awakened heart. A language that is not heard with the ears, but felt with the soul. A language that touches the spiritual DNA and activates forgotten memories. At the end of the meal, he sets off for crucifixion. But something was left in those disciples. A seed, a code, a light. They didn't fully understand at that moment, but something had already been imprinted in their fields. This is the true transmission, the one that pierces the veil of the mind and enters directly into the spirit. The language that doesn't need to convince, it just vibrates. And so, the bread becomes light, the body, a temple, and the meal, a passage between worlds. We close this sixth door with the certainty that Jesus was not just teaching, he was encoding the invisible in every gesture, word, and meal. He knew that spiritual language is made of vibration, and he showed us that everything, even a meal, can be a sacred ritual when done in a state of presence. The next door will lead us to an even denser and more transformative territory, the descent into the underworld and the confrontation with the guardians of the veil. He descended into the realm of the dead. This phrase appears briefly in the Apostles' Creed, repeated by millions without comprehending its depth. But this simple statement carries one of the greatest mysteries of Jesus' spiritual journey. After his crucifixion, before the resurrection, he descends into the depths of the invisible world, what many traditions call Sheol, Hades, the underworld. Not as a lost soul, but as an awakened consciousness that penetrates the hidden strata of existence to liberate what is trapped there. The concept of hell as a place of eternal punishment is a later theological distortion. In Jesus' time, the lower worlds were understood as dense vibrational layers, places where consciousness, after death, could find itself trapped by memories, guilt, fear, or oblivion. Jesus, upon dying, did not head straight to heaven, but crossed through the dense worlds, faced the guardians of the threshold, and illuminated forgotten zones of existence. This journey is essential to understanding his real mission. According to apocryphal texts, such as the Gospel of Nicodemus, also known as Acts of Pilate, Jesus arrives in Hades and his presence causes a spiritual earthquake. The darkness trembles, the portals open. Adam, Eve, and many others awaited liberation. He was not just a liberator of the living, he was a liberator of the dead. His mission transcended the physical plane. It was cosmic, and his descent represents the reintegration of the parts of the human soul that were forgotten in the shadow zones. In the esoteric tradition, this is the process of the dark night of the soul. Every seeker, every initiate, every soul in search of true awakening must face their own cave. The shadow is not an enemy, it's part of the journey. Jesus knew this. That's why, even without sin, he went through suffering, pain, and death. Not to be punished, but to reach the deepest levels of human experience and redeem what lay dormant there. The 3 days in the tomb were not of inactivity. They were of intense spiritual activity in other dimensions. 3 days. a number symbolizing transformation, rebirth, Trinity. During this period, Jesus acted as a psychopomp, a mythological figure present in many cultures that guides souls. Like Hermes in Greece, Anubis in Egypt, shamans in the Americas. He guided consciousness through chaos, offering not imposed salvation, but the possibility of remembering who they were. The guardians of the veil, symbolic figures of limitation, judgment, and self-forgetfulness, are not demons in the simplistic sense. They are forms of densified consciousness, collectively created by humanity over the millennia. Guilt, pacts, fears, traumas, all of this generates fields of imprisonment in the subtle worlds. Jesus, upon entering these realms, decoded these structures. He broke vibrational contracts. He reversed energetic sentences. He liberated. And by doing so, he reintegrated parts of the collective consciousness back into the light. This resonates deeply with what Jewish mysticism calls tikkun olam, the repair of the world. Each saved soul, each redeemed light, each reintegrated fragment helps to heal the web of existence. Jesus did not descend as a judge but as a physician of lost souls, and his presence in this realm established a new frequency. Therefore, after his resurrection, the disciples report encounters with him in different forms, because his vibration had expanded beyond form. This door teaches us that true enlightenment does not ignore the shadow, it passes through it consciously. When descending to the lower worlds, Jesus did not become contaminated. He transmuted. He did not run from pain. He embraced the world's suffering to dissolve its power. This is spiritual alchemy in its purest form, taking the densest and transforming it into light. There is no salvation without descent. There is no ascent without a cross. And there is no awakening without dying to the old self. From an energy perspective, the lower worlds are not underneath, but on different frequencies around us. We live surrounded by subtle layers of reality. Some vibrate in pain, others in love. What we access depends on our internal state. This is why Jesus descended to the lower worlds, because many humans are trapped in these bands even in life. His mission was to liberate both the living and the dead, to teach, through vibration, that there is a way out, and it lies within us. And here lies the great key. By accepting to descend, he showed us that there is no place where light cannot enter. No trauma is too deep. No pain is too old. No soul is irretrievably lost. Where there is awakened consciousness, there is a way. Where there is light, there is passage. And where there is love, there is dissolution of fear. This is the essence of the seventh gate, the certainty that even in the darkest darkness, there is a seed of resurrection waiting for the gaze of light. We conclude this stage understanding that death, for Jesus, was never the end. It was the gateway to the rescue of the lost parts of creation. And by crossing this realm and returning, he sealed the path to total liberation. The descent was not defeat, it was conquest. Hell is not eternal. It is a vibrational state that can be dissolved. And Christ, in overcoming it, did not win for himself, but for everyone. Now we prepare for the next revelation. The Ascension. Not as escape, but as the activation of the light body. The scene of the Ascension, described in the Acts of the Apostles, is loaded with symbolism. Jesus, after 40 days of enigmatic appearances, rises to the heavens before his disciples. A cloud envelops him and he disappears. For many, it is merely the glorious conclusion of the narrative. But for those who penetrate the veils, this moment represents something much larger, the conscious activation of the body of light. Jesus did not leave, he changed frequency. And what we witnessed there was not a departure, but a demonstration of what we all are capable of achieving. The word ascension does not mean rising in the physical sense. In the spiritual realm, it represents vibrational elevation, transcendence of density, and unification of the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual bodies into a single coherent field of light. All mystical traditions talk about this, under different names: Merkaba in Esoteric Judaism, Rainbow Body in Tibetan Buddhism, Sahu in ancient Egypt. In all cases, there is a common denominator: the total embodiment of divine consciousness in purified matter. During the 40 days leading up to the Ascension, the accounts about Jesus are enigmatic. He appears suddenly, walks through doors, is not immediately recognized, but deeply felt. This shows that he was no longer bound by the laws of three-dimensionality. His body had been reconfigured. It was physical enough to eat, touch, and be touched, but subtle enough to move between worlds. It was the so-called glorious body, a form of conscious light in action. The number 40 is not random either. It's the traditional time for spiritual gestation. 40 days in the desert, 40 days of the flood, 40 weeks of a pregnancy. In the case of Jesus, it represents the necessary time to prepare the disciples for a new kind of relationship, no longer with his physical presence, but with his vibrational presence. What he was teaching is that, after his ascension, he would be in all those who accessed that same frequency. The cloud that envelops him in ascension is an ancient symbol. In the Old Testament, God manifests himself in clouds. In the Vedas, the gods travel in vimanas surrounded by luminous mist. The cloud is the translucent veil between the planes, the threshold substance where matter dissolves into light. It represents the point of transition, the intermediary field. When Jesus enters the cloud, he is not disappearing. He is being taken up by a higher frequency dimension. This process is not exclusive to Jesus. The mystical Christian tradition has always argued that he is the archetypal model of a fully realized human being. Be perfect as your Father is perfect. You will do greater works than these. These statements are not metaphors. They are vibrational invitations to conscious ascension. He did not come just to save. He came to show what is possible for every being who recognizes themselves as an extension of the Source. The activation of the light body is a profound process of integration. It is not an escape from the world, but a transformation of the way we exist in the world. It is when the spirit fully inhabits the flesh, and matter bows to the light of consciousness. It is the opposite of spiritual escapism. It is the full embodiment of the divine in the human. Jesus demonstrated that this does not require death. It requires internal purification, alignment, and absolute surrender to the essential truth. In the post-ascension accounts, the disciples not only remember, they also awaken. Peter heals with his shadow. Stephen has visions of the open sky. John writes the Apocalypse, filled with multidimensional images. They did not just follow teachings, they vibrated on the same frequency. This is the true legacy of the Ascension, frequency transmission, not just doctrine. And this frequency is still available today, waiting to be accessed by awakened hearts. The body of light is also mentioned by Christian mystics such as Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Hildegard of Bingen. They all report experiences of ecstasy, visions, and spontaneous healings. Not by an external miracle, but through deep alignment with the inner light. They followed the same path. They entered states of such high presence that the soul overflowed the body and radiated healing, wisdom, and beauty around. From a vibrational standpoint, ascension is a state of maximum coherence. It's when thought, emotion, and action are aligned with the divine essence. In this state, linear time collapses, intuition expands, matter responds to consciousness, and the veils between worlds become permeable. Jesus experienced this in its entirety, and by doing so, he opened a field of possibility accessible to all who wish to remember who they are. We close this eighth gate with a revelation. Ascension is not an event reserved for a select few. It is the natural destiny of every soul that decides to traverse its inner veils and reconnect with its luminous origin. Jesus was the way, but not the end. He pointed inward. He showed that the awakened Christ within each of us is the true bridge between worlds. And now, prepared, we will cross the last and most sacred of all gates, the revelation of the inner Christ and the return to the One. We have reached the final threshold, not the end of the journey, but its crowning. The ninth gate does not point to a new outer world, nor to mysteries hidden in scriptures. It turns inward, to the place that has always been there, silent but alive, waiting for our genuine gaze. After all the revelations, apparitions, veils, and healings, only one truth remains. The Christ we sought is within us, not as an idea or belief, but as the divine spark of origin that resides at the center of being. In his letter to the Colossians, Paul wrote, "Christ in you, the hope of glory." This is not a theological metaphor. It's a vibrational statement of activation. Christ is not a name. It's not a religion. It's not a historical figure frozen in time. It's a frequency, a state of consciousness that manifests in a human being when they remember their true nature. Christ is the essential self beyond the ego. It's the point of reconnection with the source, where all sense of separation dissolves. Throughout history, this truth has been concealed, distorted, or transformed into doctrine. But the mystics always knew. The Christian deserts of Egypt, the Sufis in the East, the Kabbalists, the Gnostics, all of them, under different names, spoke of the same principle. The kingdom of God is within you. Jesus did not come to create a new religion. He came to remind us of a universal path of return to the One. He came to embody a latent possibility in all humanity, and for this reason his mission does not end on the cross. It multiplies in every being that awakens. This realization begins when the seeker understands that the object of the search is not outside, that the temples, the books, the rituals are merely mirrors and bridges, but the real portal is in the awakened heart. The inner Christ does not arise with formulas. He blossoms with presence, surrender, and profound silence. He is revealed in the moment when pretensions cease, and only the being remains, naked and vulnerable before life. There, in the deepest center, he shines, nameless, formless, just light. The Christ within us is the end of duality. There is no longer I and God. There is only the perception of unity, a consciousness that perceives the other as oneself, that sees in the universe the dance of the One manifested in millions of forms, that recognizes in every pain the seed of compassion, and in every shadow the possibility of reconciliation. This state is not theoretical, it is experiential. It transforms every gesture, every glance, every thought. It heals, not by intention, but by presence. The crossing of the 13 gates, in this sense, was the progressive unveiling of the layers of illusion. Each gate represented an aspect of the mind, a density of perception, a lens through which we saw ourselves separated from the source. But in the end, when everything is crossed, only the truth remains. There was never any separation. The veils were within us, and Christ was always present, whispering through intuition, love, silence. The difference now is that we hear clearly. Returning to the One is not an escape from the world. It is a total immersion into it with expanded consciousness. True awakening does not distance us from life. It brings us closer to it in its purest form. Eating becomes sacred. Breathing becomes prayer. Looking into another's eyes becomes a meeting with the eternal. The Christ within us transforms the everyday into a sacrament. Life ceases to be survival and becomes a living expression of the source. In this state, everything is integrated. There is no longer spiritual and material. Everything is spirit at different densities. Pain is no longer a curse, but an invitation. Death is not the end, but a transition. Loss is not a punishment, but a release. This is the perspective of the inner Christ. He does not judge, he understands, heals, reconnects. And this reconnection is not just individual, it echoes, radiates, transforms families, environments, societies. And here's the real key. All of humanity is on the path to Christification, not as doctrinal imposition, but as a natural movement of the soul, seeking to return to its source. Each crisis, each collapse, each apparent chaos in the outer world is, in fact, the collective birth of a new consciousness. Jesus was the prototype. We are the continuation, the manifestation of the same field, in new forms, in new times. Therefore, the final call is internal. There are no more external masters to be followed. There are no more dogmas to memorize. There is only the inner silence, where the voice of Christ pulses with the same vibration that created the worlds. He says, "You are my temple. You are my image. You are an extension of the eternal light. And this voice is yours. It always has been." At the end of the 9th gate, there is no closure. There is a beginning. The start of a life where one no longer seeks light, but lives as light. Life as an expression of the One, the heart as an altar, consciousness as a mirror of the eternal, and Christ, no longer a distant figure, but a pulsating reality in every cell of your being. And now that we have crossed the 9 doors together, I want to make you a sincere invitation. Close your eyes for a moment, breathe deeply, and ask yourself from the heart, what veil still remains within you? What part of you still fears to look at the light that you are? What point still resists the memory of your divine nature? Share in the comments, which of these doors touched your soul the most? What was awakened within you upon hearing this journey? Here at Mind Unfettered, comments are not just responses, they are collective manifestations of consciousness. And when you write, you anchor this truth in the field. You activate the frequency of Christ in words, and words are bridges. Write in the comments, "I activate the light of Christ within me through the door," and complete with the door that resonated with you the most. Let's together form a vibrational chain that echoes between worlds. Because we are not alone. We are part of a living network of awakened souls who feel, intuit, and already know that there is much beyond what has been taught. And if you are here now, it is because this memory has already begun in you. So manifest, share, help expand this field. And if this journey has touched you, don't stop here. The next step awaits you. In the video that's on your screen right now, the Brotherhood of Light, the secret knowledge of Jesus that history erased, you will discover Jesus' invisible allies, the guardians of an ancestral wisdom lineage that history tried to erase. Prepare yourself for even deeper revelations, hidden symbols, and the connection with orders of light that are still active today. Click now and stay with us. Because here at Mind Unfettered, we don't follow a path, we become the path.